We're going to discuss adding, administering, deleting, and deactivating drivers in LoadTrek. Drivers are those people who will be driving, or it could be employees, could be contractors who are driving your vehicles or vehicles that are leased to your company. So from the main LoadTrek website, once you're logged in, click on the Setup button. The Setup tab will open, and we're going to click on the very top item, which is Drivers. Now to add a new driver, we just simply click on the New Driver button down here. So let's add a new driver, and let's look at every field in here. Now as we look at this, the fields that are shaded are required. There's a couple of additional fields that are highly recommended. So let's talk about these first, then we'll go back and talk about these additional fields. So the driver ID, that is the number by which the driver will log into the website to view their logs, or into time clock, or most importantly, to log into the truck. Generally, this is an employee number. Check with your LoadTrek administrator to see exactly what number this is. Sometimes an employee number could be the last several digits of a Social Security, could be a made-up number. So we have a driver ID of 4777. I'll enter my name in here. And the passcode is the PIN or the password to allow a driver to log into a truck, to the website, to view their logs, or into time clock. So in this particular case, for driver Joel to be able to log into a truck, I have to type in 4777 as my driver ID, and again type in 4777 as my passcode. I will assign myself a DOT profile of U.S. Federal. We'll talk about this in a minute. And I am at the home terminal. Let's go San Antonio. And lastly, let's assign me to a couple of groups. And drivers can belong to one or more groups. And grouping is simply a way for a group of individuals to be assigned to a geographic location or a region or a supervisor or a specialty. So a driver can belong to one or more groups. In this particular case, if I was going to work out of San Antonio and sometimes worked out of Canada, I could assign myself to the San Antonio and to the Grand Prairie groups. So right now I have entered the bare minimum. Now notice I have a little pop-up. This is still in red, and I still have this little thing down here that says driver numbers already in use. When that happens, you'll see my save button is not lit up. In other words, this driver is already in the database. So let's enter another driver. So you notice I have no error messages. This driver has not been entered in. So driver 47777 is Dennis Widener. Passcode is 4777. DOT profile still U.S. Federal. The home terminal is the San Antonio district. This is not always required, but it is always a good idea. If your drivers are now or will ever invoke the short haul exemption, which allows them in the United States to work more than 14 hours once a week, we need to know where home is. And so that's why we assign a home terminal. So right now we have the bare minimum. And I'll click Save. Now let's go back in here. And let's look at this driver, Dennis. These other fields in here are for your use. If you need a place to keep track of email addresses, home phone numbers, cell phone numbers, CDL numbers, Social Security numbers, hire date, termination date, this is where you would do it. So let's give him the terminal address. Over here, we can keep track of his start date, his physical date, his DOT physical date, so we know when it expires. Badge issued. This is for a recurring, expiring security badge, chemical detection badge, any sort of a company issued identifier or piece of equipment that expires and that we need to keep track of. So we have now entered in the optional information for this driver. Let's go look at DOT profile. Right here we pick a DOT profile. What exactly is a DOT profile? So we go down to hours of service profile and we assign this driver the U.S. Federal hours of service. So the profile name is U.S. Federal. The days start offset. This is your GMT minus offset. So Central Time is -6, Eastern Time is -5, Mountain is -7, and Pacific is -8. Up here are some very basic parameters worn upon logon. That tells us if we're out of hours before we even log on. The warning threshold defaults to 30 minutes. If I'm going to run out of hours, how much advance warning do I give the driver? If I'm hitting my 11 hours of driving at 10 hours and 30 minutes, the driver will get a warning. Allow non-CMV. Will this driver be in both commercial vehicles and non-commercial vehicles? If yes, then you click this button. If I am a CDL holder and I'm driving a pickup truck, I have to log that time as on duty, not driving, but I don't have to log it as driving. Therefore, if that is the case, then you would want to select this. Likewise, personal conveyance is that hours of service exemption that allows a driver to use an unloaded commercial motor vehicle for a commuter vehicle. Driving from the motel to a well site, driving from a motel to a post office site, driving from your house to a terminal or terminal back to a house. Anytime you are commuting in a commercial motor vehicle that's unloaded, you don't have to log it, yet the company wants to know who's driving that truck. So clicking this button right here allows a driver to select the personal conveyance option where we identify who's driving the truck without actually logging that driver. So let's talk about our hours. Total on-duty hours is 70 and 8. So 70 hours in any 8 days, and the reset period is 34 hours. When I have 34 hours off, this is the current U.S. rule, when I have 34 hours consecutively off, I get a fresh 70 to use in any 8 days. This enable reset window, which is currently not in use in the United States, but this allows you to set up a reset window, say from 1 to 5 in the morning. So this is the hours of service rule up until the most recent reversal of the hours of service rule, in which case you had to have 34 hours off duty, but that 34 hours off had to include 2 periods of time from 1 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to leave this unchecked because that is currently not the rule, but when the hours of service rules change, this is where you go to change along with it. So this is my 70 and 8. I'm allowed to work 14-hour shifts, 11 hours of driving per shift, and any 10 hours off, whether sleeper or off duty or combination of the two, gives me a fresh 14 and 11, a fresh tour of duty. Enable the mandatory break. This is, in the United States, that rule that says you can only work 8 hours before you have to take 30 minutes off. This enables that break. Consecutive sleeper hours, you must have at least 8 consecutive sleeper hours if you're going to do split sleeper out of a total of 10. And this is what's called a sleeper berth provision. We're not going to do oil field rules. We'll look at that in a minute. And these 24-hour rules is a Canadian cycle, which we'll also look at. So I'm going to save this. Oil field is very similar, and if we bring up oil field, we'll see that it's the only real differences are we have a 24-hour reset period on my 70 and 8. Instead of 34 hours off, I only have to have 24 hours off. And there is no reset window. 14 and 11, which is true for federal. Use oil field rules, which means a driver can go off duty at well site. The minimum rest is 2 hours, the maximum rest is 10 hours, which is exactly the same as a sleeper. So going back to drivers, and let's pick on Dennis here. This dictates which hours of service profile this driver gets to use. In other words, when I'm driving, when do my violations show up? If you have any questions, please contact LoadTrek support or your LoadTrek administrator.